Friedberg, what's your take on this reported by the Washington Post and I think confirmed by Politico move by Kamala Harris?
Thank you for asking.
Price fix.
Thank you for asking.
Do you have any feelings
Jake
on it? Yes. Yeah.
I unequivocally hate socialism. Socialism destroys innovation, destroys productivity, and destroys individual liberties. Agriculture and food markets have insanely competitive dynamics because there are commodity markets, there are tons of competitors. There is no monopoly in making food, there is no monopoly in making CPG products, there is no monopoly in retail, there is no monopoly in grocery stores. It is a small margin, highly competitive, highly fragmented, free market. And the free market works in that everyone is always competing with each other, creating new productivity improvements, and as a result, over time, prices come down, except when the government intervenes and gets involved. So I would argue that the real cause of price inflation in food is not the supposed price gouging by corporate players in the ag and food industry, all of whom are deeply competitive with one another, but rather is the result of the inflation associated with government spending and stimulus coming out of COVID. Nick, Exhibit 1. The Fed balance sheet. From COVID to today, the Fed balance sheet grew from $4.2 trillion to $7.2 trillion, a growth of 70%. The Federal Reserve went out and they bought assets and they issued debt to banks and introduced liquidity into the system. If you go to the next slide, as a result, the M2 money supply increased from 15 trillion to 21 trillion since COVID, a 40% increase. Okay, so now there is more money in the system, so the cost of everything should go up, which is exactly what we've seen. We can walk through a couple of the other commodity price charts from the St. Louis Fed. Here is the price of electricity. As an example, the price of electricity has gone up a little bit less than the M2 money supply. But the truth is, when you start to actually look at ag commodity prices over time, what's happened is there was certainly a boost coming from COVID, but the competition and the challenges in overproduction in the ag markets has started to hit and started to bring prices back down. So here's the price of strawberries. Strawberries today are selling for less than they were pre-COVID. Potatoes are now back to where they were pre-COVID. Now, let me give you some statistics on some of the supposed price gouging companies in the industry. Kraft Heinz stock pre-COVID was $29 a share. Today, Kraft Heinz stock is $34 a share. 2019 revenue of $25 billion, 2023 revenue of $26 billion. EBITDA in 2019 of $6.1 billion, EBITDA in 2023 of $6.3 billion. There's not a lot of profit gouging. In fact, Kraft Heinz has not been able to keep up with the inflation. Starbucks, which we just talked about, their stock was at $90 pre-COVID and today $93. 2019 revenue of $26 billion, operating income of $4.1 billion, 2023 revenue of $36 billion, but operating income only $5.9. Margins have come down in Starbucks. Nick, if you pull up the McKinsey chart, this is a study of the grocery industry, the state of grocery in North America, 2023 by McKinsey. Accelerating pressures on profitability to cope with the pandemic's upheaval, grocers have had to dramatically increase CapEx, increase supplies. As a result, they've seen a significant impact on margins. Here's the margin profile pre-pandemic and today. Gross margin has declined by 2 points from 47.6 to 45.6. EBITDA margin has declined by 1.5 points. And now let's just go to the final chart, which is CPG companies, the companies that make food and sell it to consumers. As you can see, during the COVID era, the 3-year rolling TSR has declined since COVID across the board. So food companies are seeing food prices come down. So farmers are really suffering. Labor costs have tripled since the pandemic, but they're still having to sell products at the same price. CPG companies have lower margins and supermarkets have lower margins. So there is nowhere in the ag or food supply chain that we are seeing fundamentally price gouging or profit taking happening. What has happened is the cost of labor, the cost of moving stuff around, the cost of fuel, the cost of electricity, the cost of goods has all risen with inflation because of the increase in the money supply and federal spending and the stimulus associated with the Federal Reserve buying assets onto their balance sheet. So arguably, I would say that trying to step in and cap prices will reduce competition and as a result will reduce investment in improving productivity. And we have seen this countless times with every socialist experiment in human history has started with caps on food, and it has resulted in bread lines like you see in the image behind me today, as we can see in Soviet Russia. This is a mistake. It is a problem. It is anti-American. It is anti-free market. It is anti-innovation. It is anti-productivity. And ultimately, it's anti-liberty. And I cannot stand it. That's my rant.
Okay. Thanks for coming to Friedberg's TED Talk. Chamath, so you're nodding strongly in agreement. This is just dumb and pandering. Am I correct?
There is no sustainable solution to inflation if you cap what a company can charge, because what they'll do is they'll just stop producing. They'll manage
Stop
to
competing.
the margin that they'll just stop. And the reason they can stop is that they would rather contract and maintain their profitability than lose money. And then what happens is there's less products in the market, and so the prices go up. So I think it stands to reason that the Harris campaign has access to some reasonably smart people. They also have access to really smart people like Larry Summers. And so I think if they just make a few phone calls, they'll figure out that this is a really terrible idea.
Sachs, any thoughts? Overall election and this specific issue. You take it either way you like.
Yeah, so this story was reported by the Washington Post and by Bloomberg and others. So it appears to be more than just a rumor or conjecture. I mean, these are publications that are apparently well-sourced within the Harris campaign. So I think it is fair game for us to comment on this policy proposal that she apparently will be coming out with. Look, I think Friedberg is right about the policy. The idea of price controls is widely discredited across the political spectrum. I mean, I think virtually all economists agree on this. This was tried extensively in the 1970s, not just under Jimmy Carter, but Nixon tried wage and price controls, and Gerald Ford had this whole program called Whip Inflation Now, where they printed out these buttons called these win buttons. And then Carter extended it. That's why we had huge lines at the gas pumps, is because we had price controls on gas. And those lines at the pump went away almost overnight when Ronald Reagan came in and removed the price caps on gas. So we've tried price controls before. It didn't work. And it is remarkable that she would be proposing here potentially as her first major policy proposal on the economy to go back to this 1970s era failed policy. And I think it's really tipping her hand in terms of where her economic proposals are going to come from and what she really thinks. Keep in mind that throughout the Biden presidency, he rhetorically would blame corporate greed for the rise in inflation we saw as like a scapegoat because he didn't want to blame himself for all the spending. But she's going further now and actually instituting this as policy.
Yeah. And so just to be clear with everybody, we don't have the actual policy here, but it's been reported. Seems like it's true. Maybe it's not. Maybe they step it back. We don't know the details of this at all. What we do know is it's been tried before. What we do know is there are times when you could, like in an economic emergency, like during what was the giant hurricane or wars? You know, you can keep your eye on this. But the truth is, as we just talked about with Starbucks, you know, Sachs is like, I got a free cup of coffee or close to free. I make my own cold brew. Shout out Café Du Monde, because I don't want to pay $8 for it. The market responds. And when you put your thumb on capitalism, or you put 12 thumbs on capitalism and on the scale, all kinds of weird behaviors occur. It does not work. And consumers can just simply opt out. They can make breakfast at home. They can brown bag their lunch. And
it's a
you know
great
what?
point.
Then companies are going to be like, holy shit, people are not buying $8 coffees. Let's make a cheaper Happy Meal.
To support your point and what Chamath was messaging on our chat, look at Walmart. Stocks up 7% today because they offer lower priced solutions to consumers.
Yes.
And Dollar General and Dollar Tree are rallying as well. When the market competes, consumers benefit. And there are companies that will win. And the companies that try to price gouge and the companies that try to charge too much will lose. Starbucks has been trying to charge too much for sugar water. They have a real problem they are now tackling. Walmart is trying to bring value to consumers. They are winning. That is how free markets work. When the government steps in and says, here's how much margin you can make, or here's how much prices should be, it ruins everything. And the entire incentive structure goes away, and you end up with bread lines.
Saxy Poo, what do you got?
Well, there was a really interesting story in the Wall Street Journal this week called Kamala Harris's Economic Team and Agenda Start to Take Shape. And it was interesting because it said here in the first paragraph that the challenge of her economics team is, quote, differentiating the candidate, which is Harris, from her unpopular boss, which is Biden, without abandoning his policies. And the problem that they have is that for the last 3.5 years, there has been no daylight between Harris and Biden. And in fact, Corinne Jean-Pierre said exactly that in the article. There's been no daylight. They've been highly aligned. Now, in response to that, what the campaign has been trying to do is A, not say anything about policy, just try to redefine the candidate based on biography. She's done no interviews with the media. She's done no sort of unscripted speaking appearances. And the media has cooperated with this so far. The most egregious example was that Time magazine cover story, which was this really gauzy profile that was a hagiography, even though she refused to even do an interview with Time magazine in that story. So strategy number one has been just to kind of hide from the media in terms of what she would really do. Strategy number two was adopting some of Donald Trump's most popular policies. So she just announced no tax on tips. She was, I think, widely kind of criticized for being a copycat on that. And now we finally have strategy number three, which is to tiptoe into the campaign with her own original proposal on price controls, which I think is being roundly criticized, but it shows where her policy instincts are coming from. I mean, this is somebody who has always been on the progressive left. When she was a member of the Senate, GovTrack rated her as the most liberal member of the Senate, even to the left of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. And you're now seeing this come out in her policy proposals. So look, I think she's definitely gotten a bounce in the polls over the last few weeks because of this favorable media coverage, but it's a sugar high based on something that's not substantive. I mean, she didn't put forward any proposals. And I think that now that she finally is putting out policy proposals that can be questioned and analyzed and criticized, I think this is going to be the beginning of, I would say, a big correction in her campaign.
JCal, do you agree? Do you think her strategy is off at this point? And is it starting to hurt her to put out these proposals?
I remain undecided, moderate, left-leaning moderate, have voted Republican 35% of the time, Democrat 65% of the time, and I've been studying the strategy here. Her strategy is crushing Trump. So obviously it's working. Now, I don't like it. I think everybody should be doing debates. I was really upset that there wasn't a debate or a speed run primary. I don't like the fact that Trump and Biden skipped out on the primary debates. I think they should be forced to do debates, forced to do interviews. And so on that front, I hate what this is doing to democracy. Now, pragmatically, running out the clock as a strategy and not defining your positions too much and just, selling the vibes is a brilliant strategy, and it's working. And, as Trump said, the VPs don't matter. What she did as VP doesn't really matter. What JD Vance thinks as VP doesn't matter. VPs don't matter. You're voting for the president. The VPs get in line. Trump's positions, JD Vance flipped a bunch of his positions to align with Trump. And I think Kamala did the same when she worked with Biden. That's your job, is to align with the president. Now that she's her own, and Waltz is going to flip to her. So I think they're putting out moderate vibes. I think they're kind of socialists. I think they're not as socialist as Bernie and Elizabeth Warren, but they're not moderates. But they're pretending to be moderates, and that is working as a strategy. They are demolishing Trump, and then Trump is, getting bad advice around him. I think, if I were to handicap this, and I'll wrap up it with just one more minute. I think Trump was so good on All In. He was so good at the RNC for the first half of his speech. When he is presidential, when he has a big open tent, I love him. I think he's great. And I think he's like world positive. When he goes into grievance culture, when he goes after the race stuff like he did with the black journalists, when he goes after gender, or JD does the gender stuff and the cat stuff, I hate that stuff. Moderates hates that stuff. Women hate that stuff. And the moderates and the women in the swing states will decide the election. And Trump's campaign is floundering right now. They have to flip it back to that Trump 2.0 I described many times, where he's serious, presidential, not bullying people, not doing the insult comic thing, this going after Waltz, going after cat ladies. It's just gross and not necessary. So I think, maybe Trump after the RNC, after the DNC, will go back to Trump 2.0. That would be much better. And I think Trump has a chance of winning if he does that. If Kamala goes moderate, I think she's going to win. So that's my strategic take. I remain undecided as a voter.
But you just said she's a socialist, not a moderate.
I think in her heart, she's between like, if you had Clinton and a great question, if you had Clinton and you had Bernie Sanders, I think she kind of falls between the two. But I think she's pretending to be a moderate to get votes.
Right.
Just like Trump will pretend to be super right wing to get the, poor acted up, but he's kind of a moderate too, socially.
I think Trump is the moderate in this race, and he's much more moderate than she is. I think that actually is true. Look, I think that she's pretending to be a lot of things. She's pretending to be a moderate when really she was the most liberal member of the Senate. She's pretending to be a change agent when really she's the incumbent. Keep in mind that she has been in office now for 3.5 years as part of the Biden-Harris administration. And she was perceived within that administration as their emissary to the left wing of the party. I mean, remember that when she was put on the ticket, Biden was perceived as the moderate and she was perceived as the person on the left, and she was going to basically help consolidate those votes. So she's pretending to be a lot of things that she isn't. And the reason why it's working is because the press has fully cooperated in letting her run a campaign without doing press interviews, without doing unscripted appearances. And the press, frankly, is embarrassing itself by revealing themselves to be effectively DNC operatives. And that Time magazine cover story was just the latest example of that. I do think that this strategy can only work for so long. I think that the media is starting to feel a little bit embarrassed. They're starting to get a little bit shamed about the fact they're letting her just give them the Heisman. And I don't think she can run out the clock for 3 months without doing interviews. I think she can do this for another week or so. I think that they're going to run this playbook through the convention, but eventually she's going to have to start doing interviews, and she's going to have to start putting out more substantive policy proposals. And I think the fact that this price control proposal is their very first one that they've put out, I think this shows that this is not going to be easy for her.
It certainly jolted me awake, Sachs. I'll tell you that. So
yeah, I mean, this idea that she can pretend to be a moderate and just run on vibes with no interviews and no substantive proposals, I don't think it's going to work for 3 months. I think she's going to reveal herself.
I think an educated voter base is going to wake up to that. And particularly in that independent segment, there's going to be a lot of acknowledgement that maybe these are not going to be the right policies.
I think they're preparing their policies and they're going to drop them after the DNC. Chamath, what's your take on strategy? And then we'll move on to Science Corner.
We're in the middle of the relief rally that Biden isn't in the race. I think that we had a different version of a relief rally when everybody realized that President Trump hadn't been assassinated. So these are the pendulum swings, I think, of an electorate that still hasn't been given a clear definition of A or B. In this case, I think what's happening is there's a lot of testing of language and ideas and concepts that both sides are doing. And I think we will not know where this election is going to go until after September the 10th in that first presidential debate, because I think that these big issues will be put to the test. The journalists asking the questions will corner both candidates. Both of them will have points of view. And then I think they'll have to go into these 5 states that matter on these 5 issues that matter. And I do think that this will be one of those issues because this is a very aggressive proposal that has a lot of implications and that has a lot of historical context of never having worked, literally never.
So yeah, it's dumb. We haven't seen it, but it seems dumb on its face. And just to be clear, there is no proposal. We're just commenting on reports of a proposal. Proposal will probably come out on Friday this weekend, so you can read it for yourselves. And we'll talk about the actual proposal. If there is one, who knows? It could be bad reporting, could all be cap.